on Trackit. So now let's get the price history of the stock for the previous year. So we're going to use this new method from the Y Finance library called yf.download, and it takes a parameter in, which is the ticker symbol. So what we would do is we would say yf.download, and we would pass in the ticker variable. And we're just going to go ahead and I hate when this appears because I can't see things. And we're going to press Shift Enter, and that's going to run the cell. And you can see we got this really nice table. Oh, I forgot to pass in this optional parameter called period. You can see I mentioned it here, but I forgot. So period, and we only want for the current year. So we only want the 2020 stock prices, at least for this workshop. So we're going to go ahead and Shift Enter. And we can see that we've gotten stock prices from the 2nd of January all the way up to yesterday, which is October 16th. And we can see we've also gotten open, high, and low values for that day, as well as the trading volume, which is, I guess, how many times that stock has been traded. All right, that's all the data we'll need for our workshop. We've stored them in these variables, which we're going to be using later. So yeah, let's move on.
Before we move on, I think some people have like some questions. So if anyone wants to ask, because some people were showing some errors in the chat. So if you want to read through them, Aditya, for a little bit.
Let me pull up the chat really quick.
I just want to do that before we move on. So.
Yeah, I can pause here really quick so we can look at the chat. Okay, so I'll start here. Can you post the Trackit password again?
Ignore that. I got it. I got that.
Okay, you got that?
I think there's. I think Awab said that.
Okay, so someone. Yeah. So Awab said YF is not defined. Did you run this cell over here? So you have to run this, and then you also have to run this.
Yeah, I just ran them, and it's working now.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you have to run the cells in order, otherwise it literally won't work because each cell depends on the previous one. Yeah.
Are we skipping the fourth? No, you ran that one as well. Okay.
For me, the previous closed variable is not displaying correctly.
Oh, she fixed it.
She fixed it? Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Everyone's good? Yeah? Thumbs up all around? I don't know if there's an emote for that in Zoom. But anyways, let's move on. So now let's view and analyze our data using these two libraries called Pandas and Matplotlib. And Shreya, just interrupt me if there are any questions.
Yeah.
So we can see over here that we're presented with this really nice looking table of dates, opening prices, daily highs and lows, adjusting closing prices, and all sorts of other things, including trading volume. So this data structure that it's storing it in is called a Pandas data frame. And it's used a lot within data science and machine learning to work with specifically tabular data. So data that you might imagine in an Excel spreadsheet or data you might imagine in just a general table. Hence the name tabular data. So you can access each column similar to how we accessed a particular key in the dictionary before. But keep in mind, a data frame is not a dictionary. It's just an easier way to get columns. And you can read more about how data frames work and a little bit more about them on the Trackit sites. So you can see here's an example of a data frame. So now let's access the closing price data, only one column from the data frame. So as I mentioned before, we access it very similar to how we access the keys in a dictionary. So we're going to go ahead and do price underscore history, and we're going to do close with a capital C. That capital C is important because otherwise it's not going to work. And we're going to Shift Enter that, and we can see we only got the closing prices over here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's really easy to manipulate and analyze. Okay, maybe I didn't mention this, but Pandas data frames are so useful because you can manipulate the data just as easily as you would manipulate an Excel spreadsheet. You just need to know the right commands. So it's really useful because you can instead of having to navigate around a spreadsheet, you can just have code generate your entire spreadsheet, which is really awesome. So we're going to go ahead and try, again, getting the close column, and we're going to do this .mean method. And what this .mean method will do will give us the average value. So we're over here, we're getting the average closing price of our stock. I'm going to shift enter that. And we can see the average closing price for Apple stock is around $88.70. All right, that's not that interesting. So let's look at the maximum and minimum closing price for Apple stock. So we can use these built-in methods called max and min, which are built into Python, and they just work with our price history column, they work with Pandas data frames columns really easily. Sorry. So let's go ahead and print max, comma, and then we're going to do max price underscore history, and then we're going to capital C close. Then we're going to do the same thing for minimum. We're going to say min over here. And we should be able to just shift enter that. And you can see that the maximum closing price for Apple stock, or whatever stock you have, so in my case, it's $134, and the lowest it's been is $56. All right, that's pretty cool, but I'm still not impressed with Pandas. So let's keep going. So just how we can analyze data in place, we can also create new columns on the fly. So similar to how you do formulas in Excel, you can do the same thing with Pandas. So let's go ahead and create a new column that will tell us the absolute difference between opening and closing stock prices. So let's go ahead and create a column called diff with a capital D. And we're going to say, absolute value of price history close minus, let me just space it out really quick. Yeah, price history open. So this will give us basically the absolute difference between the opening and closing price of a stock. So nothing really happened. That's because we have to, or nothing really visibly happened. That's because we need to view the data frame afterwards. So over here, we can see there is indeed a new column added to our data frame. All right, that's pretty cool. I'm going to stop here. Are there any questions? Let me just open up the chat really quick. I'm on part 2, Niranjan. Yeah, some people are just joining. Unfortunately, I can't go back due to time reasons. But you're welcome to go through the notebook on your own at your own pace, because it's pretty self-contained. All right.
Someone said, could you scroll up to the price history part just for a second?
To this part?
Type in, yeah, I think so.
All right, yeah, I can wait
just
here
for a second. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, is the person who asked the question good now?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So what's the Google Sheets? What's the Excel in slide 1 for?
Google Sheets. Shreya can maybe elaborate on that, but we were picking stocks to analyze, so we want to make sure there's no overlap between multiple people. So that spreadsheet's just, you have to write down your name and your Discord tag.
So I can choose which one I want to analyze.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so I can just claim this one. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. All right, I hope we're good on that front. Now let's move on. So we can now use this column to do more advanced things. And this is where I think Pandas really shines for data analysis. Let's say your boss comes up to you and you're in a trading firm or a hedge fund or something, and they're like, find me the day when the opening and closing stock price this year was, the difference was the highest. And we can do this using this max method that we learned before, as well as a new method called LOC. So you can learn more about how specifically LOC works, but I will cover it at a very basic level over here. So over here, we're basically creating a column, but we're not assigning it to any data frame. We're creating a column where we're trying to find basically the max difference over here. So and this will give us a column of true and false values. And what LOC will do is it will take that array of true and false values and will give us the row that matches that true value. So in this case, what we want to do is price history diff equals max diff. So let's go ahead and run this, shift enter. And we can see for my stock, or it might depend on your stock, but for my stock on September 10th, 2020 was the highest difference between absolute difference between opening and closing price for this particular stock. All right, so now let's talk about visualization. Now, one of the most common visualizations, if you've ever watched CNBC or Bloomberg, is a graph of its price over time. And a library called Matplotlib makes this really easy to do. So let's go ahead and pull in Matplotlib by running this cell. So it's going to install it, and then it's going to import it. And we're going to learn something new about this Colab environment while we're doing this. So let's just give it a second. And it's saying restart runtime. Now, the thing is, when you click restart runtime, all the variables that you've done, all the variables that you declared before basically disappear. But there's a way to run multiple cells at the same time, run in multiple cells in sequence without needing you to go and click, play on every one of those cells. So we're going to restart our runtime. We're going to click yes. And then it's going to say, all right, it's restarted over here. Then we're going to click on runtime, and we're going to click on run before. So make sure your cursor is inside the cell, and we're going to click run before. And what this is going to do, it's going to run every cell before this one in order. You can see it is loading. It's running every cell. It is currently on. It's currently on the first cell. We do not need to restart our runtime because this package is already installed. Then we're running this. Awesome. So looks like all the previous cells have run already. Now let's go ahead and run the cell again, just to make sure we're importing the library properly, which we have. All right, now let's use this method from our matplotlib.pyplot. So this is a module inside this library, and we're declaring it as PLT. So we're going to use PLT when we're plotting stuff. So let's use that to graph the date on the x-axis and the closing price on the y-axis. So what we're going to do is we're going to say plt.plot, and we want to get the date on the x-axis. So we're going to say price underscore history, and we're going to say dot index. And on the y-axis, we want price underscore history, and we want the diff, right? The difference. So we're going to graph that. Let's also go ahead and graph the closing price as well. So we're just going to copy that same line, and we're going to graph the closing price. And what this is going to do is it's going to plot both of them on the same graph. So we're going to see them both together. And there we go. So we can see, and this is really useful because a lot of stock traders like to look for patterns in the price of a stock just by the shape. I don't know how accurate that is, but people do use that, and I find that pretty interesting. So over here, you can see in the run-up to the first Apple event, so this is Apple stock, in the run-up to the first Apple event, Apple stock price really went up. Then it went down when they didn't release the iPhones at that event, and then it went back up again when they released the iPhones, last Tuesday at the event. And then it went down again because I guess the hype died down. All right, now let's take a closer look at more recent performance of our stock, because more recent performance is more indicative of whether the stock is currently overvalued or undervalued, which is what you're going to be determining towards the end of the workshop. And let me see how we're doing on time. We're doing pretty good on time, actually.
Yeah, we got like a few questions. Someone's asking,
right, so I'll stop here.
Yeah. Before you go on, someone's asking, what does price history .index mean?
So if we look over here, right, you can see that all the values over here are bold, right? So an index is just a way for pandas to optimize you getting specific rows, because you can also get specific rows in pandas. And that index is kind of like, if you've done databases, this is like a primary key. Or if you haven't done databases, it's just a unique value for it to identify each row. Does that make sense? So that's why it's called an index. Are there any other questions, Shreya?
I'm just checking. I think we're good for now. Yeah, people are asking about GitHub stuff, but I told them that's at the end. So. Okay,
awesome. So one thing that's more indicative is the price of our stock for the last 2 weeks, right? And one way we can do that is we need to get the last 14 entries from our price history data frame. And we need to also plot that because we want to look at that. So we're going to do something very interesting, and you probably haven't seen this in other programming languages if you're new to Python. It's negative list indexes. What does that even mean? So what you're telling Python over here is that we're going to go to the end of our data frame, so the last row. We're going to go back 14 entries, and then this little colon tells it to slice the data frame. And then since we didn't specify an index, it's going to go all the way to the end of the data frame. So it's going to get us the last 14 entries, which is exactly what we want. And this is quite interesting. You can do all sorts of interesting things without really explicitly specifying the length. You can do things like -2, which will give us the last 2 elements, or like -18, which will give us the last 18 elements. And then over here, this is a matplotlib command to clear the figure, because you can only have one figure at a time, or at least by default. And we're going to resize our graph to be big enough to show all our data. And we're going to go ahead and plot just last week's closing prices. So you can see, because there was an Apple event this week, right, the price really went up due to the hype. And I guess the hype, again, died down because people were disappointed that they didn't put chargers in the box or whatever. Yeah, anyways. So now that we've kind of looked at some basic analysis techniques, we've looked at how to look at the price of a stock for the last year. We also looked at the price of a stock for the last 2 weeks. One of the things that's really useful about Jupyter Notebooks is that they're pretty well used for data science in the industry as well. So they can serve as sketchbooks or notebooks for other data scientists as well. So over here, we're just going to write our little analysis on what we think how the stock is performing, right? So over here, I'm going to mention the stock. As I talked about before, the stock price went up in anticipation of the Apple events, but then down as. Now, you might not know that much about your stock, so you might not have such a detailed explanation, but you can at least talk about the basic trends that you see on both the 2 weeks ago graphs and the 2020 graphs. All right, are there any questions before I move on to part 3, where we're actually determining if a stock is overvalued?
I'll check the chat for you too, just in case.
Yeah. I will be answering questions. I need to get some water because I am parched, but I will be back.
If anyone has like specific questions that they want to ask Aditya, like about like the content, feel free to unmute your mic too when he comes back. Okay, I will ask him to scroll up to part 1 for a second. Can do that. How do we get this code again?
All right, sorry about that. I just had to get some water because I was talking a lot.
Someone said, could you scroll up to part 1 really quickly, just for a second? And then someone said, how do we get this code again? Oh, okay, I'll answer that.
Okay, you can answer that. But so I can scroll up to part 1.
Just for a second.
How far up do you want me to scroll up in part 1?
Naranjan, how far do you want me to scroll up?
The part right where he's like initializing the YF ticker.
Oh,
the YF
okay.
ticket.
So you're at the top. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. It's also, YF.ticker capital T. Yeah.
Okay. So it's just you just create a variable called my stock and then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
By the way, feel free to look at Trackit. We have a little bit more detailed information on a lot of this stuff. I just didn't want to say all of it because then it would be very boring. But you can definitely look through the Trackit. I can see a lot of you are on step 4.
And then Sai's asking, how do we calculate the absolute difference between opening and closing stock prices?
Okay, yeah. Let me
does it
scroll
involve
down to
using
that part.
.loc? About that part. He's saying that it's asking him to create a new column. Yeah.
All right. Can we move on? Is everything good?
Someone said that their price history clone is getting errors. Maybe I can find that for him.
So we're not cloning price history. We're just creating. Oh, are you saying over here?
Close. I think he meant close.
Close.
He
so
said
we're doing.
Wait, I think he said never mind. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, he just.
Yeah, I know it happens. It happens. You know.
Yeah, it happens. I get you. My max is throwing 0 arguments error. Kendall said that.
Kendall is saying why. So you have to run the first cell and then you have to restart your runtime. So run this first cell, which will install Y Finance because it's not installed by default. So you have to run this cell. You have to click on restart runtime. And then you have to run each of these cells one by one. All right, we good?
Did you answer the question about the max? My max is throwing 0 arguments error.
Max shouldn't throw arguments error. Maybe it's a mistake in your code. So over here, you have to pass in like a specific column. You can't just pass in price history, right? Otherwise, it doesn't know what does it mean to have a max of an entire data frame. Yeah, and Abigail mentions, yes, make sure you run every cell in order. Otherwise, it will literally not work because every cell depends on the previous one. Okay, cool. I think that's answered most of those questions. If not, we'll have some time at the end of the workshop for individual questions. So yeah, let's move on. So now let's determine if a stock is overvalued or undervalued. Now, this section is filled with a little bit of new vocabulary, but we'll go over it at a very high level. Just as a disclaimer, I am by no means Jordan Belfort. I am not the Wolf of Wall Street. I am not some crazy investor. But I mean, I learn what I can. So investors do use specific metrics to determine if a stock is worth investing in. You know, things like the PEG ratio, the EPS, and the general industry and stock trends, among other things. That's why you have traders focused on specific industries. So if you were to watch CNBC, they're going to pull in someone who's specialized in only tech stocks to talk about, you know, specifically how technology as a sector is doing. But one thing to keep in mind is literally none of this is an exact science because you're trying to predict irrational behavior, which is human behavior, and that is very hard to do. Although I guess the markets are a little more rational than, you know, just general human behavior. But keep in mind, even the best hedge funds can only provide 7 to 9% return on investment. Maybe a little bit more, but on average, right, if you look at it year over year, it just comes down to 7% per year. So the first metric we're going to talk about is a PEG ratio, which is short for price over earnings to growth ratio. So this is a ratio of how much a stock is priced compared to how much a company is makes in terms of revenue. And this is also adjusted for growth. So for example, you might have a company that doesn't make as much money, but is growing a lot, right? Like Uber when it initially started. Although that's a pretty bad example because Uber's IPO is not good. And a low PEG ratio will tell you that a stock is actually trading kind of lower than what the company makes, meaning it might be undervalued. And a really high one may tell you that the stock is trading much higher than what the company makes. So, but the thing is, right, realistically, what a high PEG ratio may mean is that a stock is hecka hyped, right? One example of this is the recent IPO of Snowflake, which is a data company. That was very high, very hyped. Also, some examples are Uber. So Uber right now actually has a negative PEG ratio, which we're going to talk about later. But initially it was very overhyped, but Uber still doesn't make money. So I don't know why. It's also because of certain retail investors. For example, r/Wall Street Bets, if you've heard of them. They're a group of people that decide to make some interesting investment decisions, and Wall Street is actually watching them because they do influence the market a little bit. So it's a good idea to do research before following ratios blindly. But yeah, I would recommend looking at Track It if you want to read more about the PEG ratio. So let's go ahead and view the PEG ratio of our stock. So we actually took this out of the info dictionary earlier, so we can just print it by just typing in PEG ratio. And keep in mind, this will only work if you run every other cell in the notebook beforehand. So please do that. All right, so the PEG ratio of Apple is 2.97. And you might think that's a bit high, right? It's trading around two to three times earnings. But the thing is, Apple and generally tech stocks are very high growth, right? Because they can move very fast, they can develop new things. It's also an industry that's really changing a lot. An example of an industry that might not be changing a lot is like the oil and gas industry or the hospitality industry, because that's actually shrinking because of COVID-19. So a negative, and that kind of segues into what I was talking before about negative PEG ratios, where the growth of the company is negative. An example of this is Uber right now, because Uber is facing some really serious threats to its existence, including California's Prop 22. California is passing a law that potentially would lose them a lot of money, even though they're technically not profitable yet. Another example is just general market conditions. Right now, COVID-19 has changed a lot of the airline and the hospitality industry, and also kind of indirectly the oil industry, because people are not driving to places as much. So a negative PEG ratio is not an explicit warning to stay away from the stock. Do keep in mind that low company growth could lead to stock dips long term. And when you're considering PEG ratios, also look at the sector, right? As I mentioned before, tech stocks generally trade at higher ratios because they are such high growth companies. And now let's talk about EPS ratio. Does anyone have any questions before I move on?
Someone asked, is snow too new to have a PEG ratio or PEG ratio?
That is a good question. Does the API give you a PEG ratio? It might be calculated using projected earnings.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So it gave him none.
I'm at the tail end of part 1, and I'm having trouble with the YF download ticker symbol, and I already restarted the runtime.
All right. So I will help you towards the end, because I think you joined late, and unfortunately I can't go back for time reasons.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the EPS ratio. So the EPS, or the earnings per share, tells you the amount of money a company has made per stock that has issued, or share of common stock that's issued. And I decided to pull in a source here, and Investopedia describes it as or describes the relation between EPS and kind of value, is that a higher EPS indicates that you have greater value because investors will actually pay more for a more valuable company stock. And if you want more information about the EPS ratio, please see Track It. So, with the data from Yahoo Finance, we've actually gotten two EPS values, right? We've gotten something called the trailing EPS, and we've also gotten the forward EPS. So the trailing EPS is actually based on historical earnings data, right? Legally, every publicly traded company, or every company that has a stock on the stock market, is supposed to release its earnings every quarter. That is just required. And a forward EPS is based on projected earnings. So what analysts have, advanced models, or maybe not so advanced models. I actually don't know what kind of models they use, but they use that to project the growth of a stock, and they use that, or the growth in earnings for a particular company. Sorry, and they use that to determine the potential EPS in the future. So we're gonna go ahead and print both trailing EPS and forward EPS. So trailing EPS. We're gonna go ahead and print forward EPS. Now we're going to go ahead and shift enter that, and you can see, Apple's EPS ranges from 3.87, which is its, projected EPS, and its trailing EPS is 3.296. All right, now it's time to use those two metrics to make a determination, right? This will help us determine if we think, right? This is, again, very opinion-based, because analysts will disagree on a lot of this stuff. So we're going to use these opinions, these metrics to form an informed opinion on whether we think the stock is overvalued or undervalued. Now, I may understand that you may not be comfortable enough with these concepts to make a definitive assumption on whether you think the stock is overvalued or undervalued. So I gave you some questions to consider, right? Is the PEG high or low? If it's high, is the EPS or the industry it's in justifying that higher EPS or justifying that PEG, right? For example, tech, as I mentioned before, is a very high growing sector. And I think biotech is on fire right now because of all those therapeutics and treatments that are being developed for COVID-19, as well as other things. But things like, the automotive industry and the hospitality industry, maybe not as high growth right now. So those are some factors to look into. Also, based on your last 2 weeks graph that you made, is the stock doing well recently, or has it been kind of dipping recently? And is there any growth to support the PEG it currently has? And just generally, like based on your knowledge or readings, how is the industry doing in general? Like tech stocks are doing really well because people are working from home. I think I mentioned, biotech is on fire right now, literally, because they're developing vaccines and therapeutics at such a breakneck pace. But the oil and gas industry is like, maybe it's not doing so well. So maybe consider that. So over here, now you make your determination whether you think Apple is over or your stock. So in this case, I'm using Apple stock. So I'm gonna say it's actually not overvalued because Apple is projected to grow a lot, especially considering the new products that they've just released. Maybe because of the economic downturn, people aren't able to buy these products, but I would say it's not overvalued currently. So I'm going to say false over here, but you set that to true or false depending on your observation. And I'm actually going to give you guys a minute to maybe think about this and also answer. I'll be able to answer any questions that you may have. Are there any questions, Shreya?
Yes. So someone said, does overvalued mean that the stock costs more than it's worth, and undervalued is the opposite?
Exactly. Yeah, that is exactly what that means. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, different analysts will disagree on this because some metrics are more important to the certain analysts than others. Yeah.
Yeah. And then someone was asking about the difference between the EPS and the price of the stock.
Well, it's just the way it's calculated, right? So the price of a stock is determined by the market purely, right? So the market determines how much they think something is worth, right? And so when you go ahead and you see the bid prices of a stock, so that's what people think it's worth currently. And the EPS is just how much money is made per share of the company. So this might, the only way this ratio changes is when the earnings go up and down, right? Or they issue more shares, right? So they're not the same thing. All right, so the session, I don't think it's being recorded, but this notebook is actually available to everyone. I will link the GitHub repository so you can go through the notebook on your own time if you missed something. And you can also go ahead and make a PR because the notebook is pretty self-contained and it explains a lot of this stuff for you.
It's actually getting recorded, so we'll let you know if you guys.
Oh, it is being recorded. I didn't see that. Yeah. Okay, nice. All right, yeah, Snow may be too new if it doesn't have a PEG ratio. Wow, Snow IPO'd like a month ago. Yeah, obviously it hasn't been a quarter, so it doesn't have any earnings yet. All right, so I've determined that Apple is, not overvalued, and I'm going to go ahead and put my Discord tag here, and that's going to be put on. Oh yeah, by the way, this is how to get your Discord tag because I know some people had issues with this in the registration process. So I'll just go over it really quick. So you see this thing at the bottom left, we're going to go ahead and click on it, and that's going to copy our Discord tag. And we're going to go ahead and use that. And where is my Chrome window? Yes. I'm going to go ahead and paste it in that. Perfect. And we're going to go ahead and shift enter that cell and don't modify the cell at all. So this cell will take every variable that you've declared before as well as, some information that that we just created, which was like, whether we think it's overvalued or undervalued. And it's going to create a really nice infographic with the stuff that we've created within this workshop. Now, if you want to learn how it works, I do have an annotated version of the code in Trackit, so you can go ahead and look in Trackit for that. And by the way, all this information, like Trackit, potentially even the recording, I don't know whether that's going to be uploaded. All this information will be available to you after the workshop. So if you were late, that's totally fine. Just make sure to get your PR in before the end of October so you can earn that t-shirt from DigitalOcean. Awesome. So let's go ahead and enter that. Yeah.
Oh. So I caught up on part 1. So I'm getting started on part 2, and the Trackit doesn't really explain like how to do the things it's asking in the beginning of part 2.
I think the notebook should be self-explanatory. If it's not, unfortunately, you might need to watch the recording since we are running pretty low on time. We have 9 minutes to make a PR. So.
Okay. So I have to get this out myself then. Okay.
All right. So now we have this really nice infographic. It is transparent. That's why you're seeing gray, but is like it will be on a white background when you view it. So we're going to go ahead and click on this little like folder icon, and you should see an image with the name of your stock. So over here, AAPL. So let's go ahead and download that. And let's just download it to the desktop. Sure, desktop is fine. And then we're going to go ahead and file download IPyNB. So we're going to download the notebook. I think this should be in your Trackit. If it's not, then that's fine. I'm explaining it here as well. We're going to click this download.ipynb, and we're also going to save that. And you want to name this notebook the same name you gave your stock. So AAPL would be what we're putting here. All right. All right, so now that we've gotten that set up, in the beginning, I had you guys fork the repository, right? So let's go ahead and look at that fork. If you haven't forked the repository, Shreya, can you put the link to the repository in the chat where people can click the little fork button? So make sure you click the fork button and it'll make a copy, your own copy of the repository. Then we're going to go ahead and copy the link of our fork, and we're going to go to our Git client. If you need help on cloning a repository, please check slide, I think 2 on Trackit, or it might be slide, it's just called Git, right? I think it's called, Git cheat sheet. If you look at the Git cheat sheet, it will show you how to clone a repository. I'm just using GitHub Desktop because that's easier to do. And we're going to go ahead and click on File, Clone Repository. I'm going to go ahead and paste this URL. And we're going to say research, HTF research. We're going to clone it. Awesome. And we're going to use this fork to contribute to the parent project. And open it in your file explorer. And it opened over here on my separate screen. So I'm going to pull it over here. And so what we want to do here, this is very important, by the way. Otherwise, we're going to have some merge conflicts, and it's going to be a real problem to fix them. What we're going to do is we're going to create a folder here called infographics. Spelled exactly as it is, please. Yes, infographics. And we're going to create a folder called notebooks. I don't know if I can make this bigger, but Shreya, can you put the names of the folders in the chat? So make 2 folders. One is called infographics, one is called notebooks.
Okay, I misspelled infographics. I will retype that one.
Please don't misspell it like Shreya did, yes.
Sorry.
No, it's totally cool. I know. Typos, they suck. We're going to go ahead and drag our notebook into the notebooks folder that we just created. And we're going to go ahead and drag our infographic into the infographics folder. All right, so we should have dragged both of those in. And if you're using Git, like the command line version of Git, what you would do then is you would do git commit, or no, first you would do git add dot. So that will add everything in this folder to your working branch, I think it's called, or I forgot the exact term, but basically you're adding these files to the place where you commit it, right? Or the working tree is what it's called. Yes. So we're going to say git add dot on the UI that I'm using. We can just go ahead and click these two, and that will, do the same thing. And then over here, once we've done this, you type in git commit -m, and we give it a message. So in this case, we would say create infographic for, and then for the stock you have. So in this case, AAPL. On the UI portion, using this GitHub desktop application, I would say create infographic at the bottom. So, and we're going to go ahead and commit. Let me just make sure that is my fork. Yes. We're going to go ahead and click on commit, and we're going to go push it on the command line. If you want to push something, you just say git push, and it will automatically push to your forked repository. On this UI, we just click this little push button, which I'm going to click. All right, so now it's pushed. Now let's go over here to our fork and let's refresh it. And we can see it says this branch is one commit ahead of ACMUTD main. It might say something different for you, but the thing that matters is we want to click this little pull request button. And we're going to go ahead and create a pull request. Click on this green button, and you can leave this as the, this is the default message. Just make sure it is that. You don't need to do anything here. You can type in comments if you want, but I don't care about that, since we're just going to merge it directly to main. Click on create pull request, and that should have created a pull request. So wow, we already have 7 pull requests. Some of you are very ahead, which is great. Visa stonks, we have
I just want to add, if you want to know the command line prompts, go to the track IT.
Yeah, track it has
command line prompts.
Yeah, track it has some of our awesome staff have made this Git cheat sheet, which explains a lot of the stuff that I just went over.
Excuse me, I think I should. Wait. When can I access the recording? So I think that'll help me a lot more. Or if you can help me.
I don't know when the recording will be available, but.
Or if you can help me for a few minutes after this session.
Yeah, we can hop on a VC afterwards because we are kind of approaching the end.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from anyone else about any of this process?
I was just gonna ask. So I managed. You said to download the desktop version. So it took me like some while to download and get it set up. So I kind of missed out. So I just need like a little summary, because I got to like the part where I click file and then clone repo. And so do I then click like the
Then you go ahead and paste the URL of your fork. So in this case,
so the URL of my fork, right?
Yeah, and you paste that here.
Wait, just give me 1 second. The URL part. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I got that down.
And then you clone it, and then you open a file browser to the folder where you cloned it. You create 2 folders. One is called infographics. The other one is called notebooks. And then you put your notebook inside the notebooks folder, and the infographic inside the infographics folder. Make sure it's named. Yeah. Sorry.
It just says remote upstream already exists.
Did you use the right URL? Your fork, not the ACMUTD repository.
No, yeah, I used my one, the HTF research one. Let me do that again if that didn't go through before. So.
All right. So if you need any other help, I think we're out of time in this particular Zoom session, but I will be available in the VC for a little bit of time to help you guys out. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you everyone for showing up. This was an awesome experience. I hope you guys learned a lot about Python and data analysis as well as pandas. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of Hacktoberfest. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. and I will be in the Discord VC if anyone needs any help. Yeah.
Do we just like wait here?
I guess, yes. Can you stop the recording? Wait, who started the recording? Was it you?
Oh, hold on. I think I didn't start it, but I'll stop it.